you found the skeleton, how would you tell it to represent? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
Hey folks, thank you so much for coming out, and thank you Dapper Dino for inviting me onto your channel. I do really appreciate the opportunity to come in and talk to you. Yeah, well, thank you. I am very honored. That is weird. No sound from Neff.
People should be able to hear both of us.
Yeah, let me see. Testing.
Yep, that was my fault. Yeah. So apparently, OBS just decided that my actual default microphone just didn't need to be the microphone I was going to use. Thanks, OBS. That was helpful. Really appreciate that. Anyway, sorry about that, guys. What I was saying was that, yeah, this is my Pride Month special because basically last month I didn't, or not last year, sorry, I didn't really have a Pride Month special because I didn't really have anything planned, and I didn't really plan for this to be a Pride Month special either. It's just that this is a topic I've been wanting to talk about for a little while, and then I decided that, you know, June would be a good time to do it. So, yeah, and basically, like I said, but you didn't hear, David is one of the people who I know cares about this, and is interested, so he was the first person I asked to come on with me on this. And so the first thing I want to say is that this is going to be a conversation primarily about linguistics and etymology, and so what we're not going to be doing is making sure that everyone is thinking that we're going to be coming at this from a prescriptive standpoint. Now, it's fine to have prescriptive ideas about language, right? I think language should be used this way. Now, sometimes it's not fine, sometimes it is, right? That's why we have these fights about how to properly use English. But what we're going to be talking about today is how English is and has been used, and why those facts can cause confusion or make people upset, or why people cannot understand each other. So, I personally, for instance, do think that you should do things like, you know, they, if someone says that that's their preferred pronoun. But what we're going to be talking about eventually is things like, why is that seems really weird to some people and like it's agrammatical. We're going to talk about that. Why is it that there's disagreement about the basic meaning of terms like gender and sex? We'll talk about that. We're not going to say that, I'm not going to say that this is how they ought to be used. I will say that the current use of them in differentiated ways is useful, but that's a prescriptive thing. And if it were up to me, I would say, yeah, I think it's a useful distinction that we should keep doing. However, that's not the linguistics thing, because linguistics is very much a what is actually happening, not a what should be happening situation. So that's our primary way we're coming at this, even though I do have my position, and I think it probably agrees pretty much with David's and probably most of my audiences.
Yep. Also, just letting you know, you have a brand new 14-month membership.
Deviantic TV says, Happy Pride Month from the UK. Thank you very much. And of course, there's a pride and a trans flag, so thank you very much. Okay, so the one thing I want to talk about first is most of my audience has as their first language English. And one of the interesting things about first languages is that while you tend to know the rules of grammar as a linguist would, you know, describe them based on how the language is actually used, there are usually rules that you don't actually know how to articulate. Like most people who speak English know that adjectives come before nouns, right? So you say, you say the old man, not the man old.
Yeah.
But
now it's interesting because in some languages, I think Spanish is one of them, is that it is reversed.
Actually, so, most languages, it's the other way around.
Yeah, it's interesting that English is kind of weird in that regard.
It is.
Is that the case with most of the Germanic languages?
So it is more common in Germanic languages, but it's a feature that's sort of scattered around. And it's most common with languages that are head initial languages. So head initial means that the head of a phrase is the thing that everything else in the phrase hangs on. So, for instance, adjectives hang on the noun. They're modifiers for the noun. Head
Right.
initial languages tend to have postpositions rather than prepositions. They tend to have adjectives follow. They tend to be verb initial because verbs tend to be the most important bit of a main clause of a sentence.
Right.
Um, and English is kind of a mix. Many languages do mix up head initial versus head final in certain ways. English does head initial with, sorry, it tends to do head final. So it tends to do prepositions and adjectives before nouns and things like that. But many languages do a little bit of a mix. It's just a thing. But one thing I want to point out is a rule about grammar that I think you know about, David, and I think maybe some of my audience does, but most of them might not. This is an example of a rule that exists in English, but you probably don't know about unless you either learned it as a second language or you're like really into linguistics and things like that, and you really read into it. One is that while we all know that in English, adjectives are in front of nouns, they actually have an ordering. You can say, my brown leather walking boots. You can't really say my leather walking brown boots. That's the wrong order.
Right.
So most people don't realize it and they couldn't articulate it. But in English, adjectives actually have to follow a ranked order. There's opinion, size, age, shape, color, origin, material, purpose. Adjectives
Right.
have to be strung in that order. But most people couldn't give you that order off the top of their head. And even if you ask them, hey, is there a particular order that adjectives have to go in? Most people are like, well, I guess maybe, I don't know. And it's not until you give them an example of
Right.
a phrase that uses the wrong order, they're like, hey, that doesn't seem right. So one of the things that I want to keep in mind here is that the fact that someone can't articulate why a new use of language seems ungrammatical to them doesn't mean that it's not the case that it's a change in grammar. Because one of the things that we see, especially with pronouns, is people saying, well, you can't use they to refer to singular reference. And then some people say, well, you just did it just here. And then someone say, well, that's not the same thing. And then they both kind of fight about what that means. And it's because of one of these reasons. Something we're
Right.
going to get to is there's a rule in English that most people don't know about, at least historically, and it explains this disagreement. But we're actually going to start first with gender and the etymology of gender. And so, David, give me your understanding of the word, what it means, and where it comes from, and how it got to where it is today.
I'm sorry. I was on something else. Can you repeat that? The word they?
Yeah, no, gender. We're going to start with gender.
Okay, gender.
So just give
Yeah.
me your idea of its etymology, its history, stuff like that.
Okay. Well, without looking it up, I would imagine gender being related to biological sex in some way. That is the way that it is often used and presented in modern day language. So I'm guessing that is kind of how it was always used. But I'm guessing that is probably wrong.
Yeah, actually, as it turns out, its use in regards to sex is a relatively modern thing, and then its differentiation from sex is an even more recent thing. So what we're
Right.
going to do first is we're going to check out the etymology of the word.
Yeah.
So it comes into English in the 14th century as a generic term for sort of any, basically just means kind of thing, right? So this is coming in from Norman French with genre, which is also where we get the actual word genre, like a genre of fiction, etymologically related to the word gender. And it is coming from the Latin genus, which is where we get like genus and species. So you can see that the overarching theme here originally for the word is just a group of things that are similar. It doesn't have anything to do with reproduction or biology necessarily. It's just this is a group of similar things. And so it's actually used originally, like the earliest use of this in terms of like when we use it for like word classes and things like this is in fact like that. So when grammarians started talking about gender in languages like the masculine gender, the feminine gender, and neuter or common, if we're talking about certain Germanic languages versus neuter, Or in other languages, there are things like animacy distinctions or rationality distinctions, all of which fall under gender. So one of the things that people I hear ask, especially in language classes, is why did linguists have to call this thing gender when they're talking about certain types of noun classifications? And because it to the student, the normal meaning of gender has to do with some kind of thing, either to do with sex or performative gender roles or something like that. And it doesn't seem to have any obvious connection to just a group of words. But the thing is, that's where it came from. And so what we actually see is that it isn't until the 15th century that the word sex starts to take on, like, it originally did refer to a biological distinction between male and female, but it wasn't used as a verb. It wasn't used to refer to the act of mating. But then in the 15th century, it starts being used that way. And so over the course of the 20th century, it started to shift into meaning that idea of either biological or some kind of performative sense. And at first, it was actually seen as a humorous euphemism because you're bringing the word from the realm of grammar, where we talk about masculine gender as a group of nouns, and now you're using that humorously to refer to the male sex without having to say the word sex because it was a naughty word.
Right. So basically, what happened was they kind of co-opted the word gender to be a more clean version of biological sex.
But then in the 70s, the late 70s, it started. Oh, wait, was it this or was it the 60s? Let me double check. No, yep, the mid 60s, basically. Feminists started using the word gender differentiated from sex to refer to the sociological things that happen that are usually associated with members of a particular sex, but don't have to be.
Right.
So,
So basically, that's kind of like gender expression. Like some women decide to have long hair, some decide to have shorter hair,
mhm,
stuff like that.
right. So one of the things to remember is that this starts in the 60s, but it is by no means the normal use of the word until fairly recently, because the first attestation of a word used in a particular way is usually going to be well before that word becomes the normal way to refer to whatever it's being used to refer to. So
Yeah.
what
Well,
we're
by the way, I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's kind of I kind of wanted to point out Snapchat's comment. Um, just think it's pretty Snapchat. It's pretty evident that gender is being used to mean biological sex in the sidebar chats.
well, it
Snap,
is
Snapchat. Yeah,
in some cases. And we're
right,
going to talk
exactly.
about that. We're going to
Right.
also. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of point this comment out. If gender is not commonly used as a placeholder for sex, then why is male, female the default options when asked for gender? So sounds like he needs to pay attention to this video.
Yep, we're actually going to be. This is exactly what we're talking about. Is why is it that there's some people making the distinction and some people not, and why it's important to know what the person you're talking to is meaning. So what we're
Right.
going to do next is we're actually going to go through 4 different dictionaries going forward in time, just looking up the word gender. Because the thing about dictionaries is they don't tell you what a word should mean or what you're supposed to use it as. The purpose of a
Right.
dictionary is when you see or when you read a word or hear a word, look it up in the dictionary. That's going to give you the most likely meanings that might be meant by the speaker or writer. And it is based on how words are being used right now. And if a reading is so obscure, the dictionary people don't really get it, not going to end up in the dictionary. So what you can usually say is true of a dictionary is that it is giving you the general understanding of a word's meaning as used by most of a population of speakers for whom the dictionary is designed.
Right. And I kind of wanted to kind of take a pause. About 10 years ago, I think, the dictionary kind of said that literally was can be used as a figurative of speech, such as I can literally eat an elephant right now. I'm so hungry, something like that. And we understand that literally here is being used as a figure of speech, as a hyperbole, so to speak. And I remember people were kind of pretty upset about that change a couple of several years ago.
I'm not a big fan of it, but I also recognize it was the right thing of the dictionary to do because they
Right.
are there to describe use, not prescribe use.
Exactly. And language purists, of course, are kind of upset about that.
Oh,
But
we're going to get
uh,
into some areas where linguistic prescriptivists make silly calls and
yeah,
why that
absolutely.
is. So
Yep.
here we're going to look at the Webster's Dictionary from 1828, which is the oldest dictionary I could find that had this, and I didn't have to pay like $100 for. Because, sorry guys, I don't just have extra, $100 to toss at a dictionary subscription service. Because
Yeah.
that's, yeah. Anyway, so gender, we're not going to pay too much attention to the etymology stuff since we really got that. A property, kind, or sort, a sex, male or female. Hence, in grammar, so here it's interesting actually, we're getting this dictionary mixing up the actual etymology. So this dictionary is attributing the grammatical use to the second definition of a sex, male or female.
Yeah.
So then we have verbs, which aren't terribly important. So in 1828, the use of the word gender to basically be synonymous with sex was pervasive to the point that even dictionary writers would get which term came first mixed up. So then we're going to look into Webster's 1913, which still has basically the same kind of thing. So, kind, sort, one gender of herbs, sex, male or female, which interestingly it calls obscure or colloquial. 1913. So in 1913, it seems like, according to Webster's, sex is still the predominant thing you to refer to the maleness or femaleness of a person.
Right.
And then it also has as a grammatical definition. So this is saying that this is now a specialized definition that really don't need to see outside of grammatical discussions. A classification of nouns primarily according to sex, secondarily according to some fancied or imputed quality associated with sex. So that's, from a linguistic standpoint, it's a little iffy to say that that's how that definition should be used, but that's okay. So we also have a R. Morris, who I don't know who it is, but his prescriptive discussion says gender's grammatical distinction applies only to words. Sex's natural distinction applies to living objects. So R. Morris, whoever that was, but he was important enough to want to be included in, or that this dictionary included his quote, is saying that it's, according to him, it's technically improper to refer to gender in terms of being a man or a woman or a girl or a boy. But we still don't have the distinction with the idea behind like gender roles and societal constructs around gender versus sex. And so now we're going to get into a 1989 usage dictionary. Now, an interesting thing about this is this dictionary doesn't just give a definition. It goes through the history of how the word has been used. And one of the things I want to point out here is that this is after, like over a decade, it's the first use of gender to refer to gender roles as separate from just sex. We're going to see in 1989, was this still the use? So we have use of gender to mean sex has been cited with disapproval in books on usage for many years. 1926 seems to have been the first to raise the issue, and his remarks are typical, which he just complains about the same thing we saw. Grammatical gender denotes a subclass of words, so we already had that. So, for instance, they talk about la versus le, like la femme, the daughter of the son. Sex does not always enter into it, such as the French word for pen, plume, belongs to the feminine gender and takes la. Word for pencil, crayon, is masculine and takes le. So much for grammar. The sex sense of gender is actually centuries old. The Oxford English Dictionary records it as early as 1300s, and it was included as a standard sense in the dictionaries of both Samuel Johnson, 1755, and Noah Webster, 1828, which we actually did look at. Its use during much of the 19th century seems to have been, if not common, at least unremarkable. So we have a reference from the 1859 Tale of Two Cities, Black Divinities of the Feminine Gender. So here we have this being used that way. Let's see. So here we have just a list of different citations of someone using the word gender in regards to sex. But what we actually don't get all the way through this entire usage dictionary in 1989, which is supposed to be telling people how words tend to be used in detail, is we actually don't get any hint that in 1889, this dictionary, the dictionary writers were familiar enough with the technical sense feminism use of the word to include it anywhere. So all the way up until 1989, at least, this was not how the word was being commonly used. And we're going to talk about why that's important after I read a super chat. For $4.99 from Valkyrie Vision, 3 of my 5 kids are in the Alphabet Mafia, but I love all 5 of them. Of course I do. They're my kids. Well, good. As well you should. Also, Alphabet Mafia just makes me laugh.
Yeah. By the way, for those who don't know, the Alphabet Mafia is kind of a term for like the LGBTQ plus community.
There are getting to be a lot more letters than I'm actually comfortable saying in a row.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I just say LGBTQ plus, and then everyone knows like the plus stuff. But anyway, I digress.
Eventually, you're just gonna have to type out the entire alphabet.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, I've even seen it with the number 2 in there at one point, and I was just like, all right, that's getting a little bit too far, guys.
Yeah.
Once we're adding numbers, So the reason I think it's important to point this out, right, is because you'll get people who simply reject the idea that gender has some meaning that is significantly different from sex when referring to people. But the thing you have to remember is your first language tends to be deeply ingrained, including the meaning of the words as you learn them in your first language. And this is 1989. This is not that long ago. So there are people who legitimately will be confused by the idea that you're using the word sex and gender to mean different things, because for their entire lives, decades of their childhood, their entire time growing up, that wasn't a distinction that people were drawing. Now, is that an excuse to not recognize the difference and to pretend that it doesn't exist, or to pretend that people are speaking nonsense when they use these words differently? No. It is absolutely not an excuse. But it does mean that if you encounter someone who is honestly confused about that fact, it means it's time to take a moment and tell them why there's a difference, how the difference is coming about, why it is that you're using a different word to mean what they mean when they say gender. Because remember, this is what, 30 years ago, basically? That's not that long ago. There are lots of people who are over 30 years old, grew up not using these words this way, and who may not be in spaces where the words as they're used now are commonly used that way. So one of the reasons that I'm doing this whole thing is because I think there are people who, actually I know there are people who are legitimately confused by what is now seen as the proper way to use these words, but that was not seen that way not that long ago, simply because independent of any kinds of bigotry or prejudice, even without those, because that isn't how they were used on the ground in the world those people were living. And then finally, we get to a 2022 entry, which is the current Merriam-Webster for gender. So now I haven't been able to go find like all of the dictionaries from like 1989 to now. So sometime between then and now, and probably closer to now, we actually get the first we have the grammatical class definition. That's fine. Then we have the sex is still the second definition. So Merriam-Webster 2022 is telling you most of the time, most people use the word gender. They just mean sex. So what that means is if you're in a community where that word gender normally isn't a synonym for sex, you're probably in the minority, at least in the United States, in the year 2022, which is why I think it's important to make sure that when you see people who are not sure what you're talking about, maybe even getting angry about it, you have to realize that they're probably legitimately not understanding, perhaps intentionally, but perhaps not, that you're using the word differently. Because only when we get all the way down to definition 2C, well, 2B and C, are we getting to things that are similar to the way that a lot of people are big into things like LGBT plus activism, celebrating Pride Month at all, and finally getting down to this, where we have things like the behavioral, cultural, or psychological traits typically associated with one sex, or gender identity, where we're getting to things like have a gender X as opposed to male or female in the state driver's license, things like this. And then we're sent off to look at gender identity as a separate definition. Vandelli 1998 for $5 says, I was taught all my school life, Pluto was a planet. Things change and some people need to get used to change. I agree. I do agree. But one of the things you have to remember is that there may be people who are not just used to the change, but might not even be fully aware that there was a change. fact, I'll bet there are people out there who didn't really get the memo that Pluto is no longer considered a planet. And if you tell them that it's not, we'll be surprised.
Yeah.
So, now, again, like I keep saying, this is not an excuse to stay ignorant, right? But it is a reason why things like that exist. So, if you are, in fact, of the opinion that only the previous dictionaries are correct, well, first, you don't know how dictionaries work. So, there's that. Dictionaries describe the current common usage. And two, you should recognize that other people are using these words this way, and you should probably figure out how they're being used. And third, if you're already using these words in the way like, section 2, sometimes it might actually behoove you to take a step back from the discussion you're having and explain to someone what you mean. And so we're going to do the same thing basically with the word for sex, although I think I forgot to get the etymology for sex. We'll just get it right here. I think I actually did get it, and I just accidentally deleted that. So, sex is from the Latin sex, a state of being either male or female, which is of a certain origin. And so it enters English pretty early on, and basically it just stays with roughly meaning maleness or femaleness until in the 1500s it starts taking on meanings to do strictly with the act of having sex and the organs associated with it specifically. Venerable says, what if they keep telling me I don't exist or I think you mean, or I'm a biological oddity because they're making me mad. Well, that's a persistent and intentional choice to be, one, to ignore you as a person and to not understand what you're saying. And at that point, they're no longer engaging with you in good faith. Because there's a difference between being legitimately confused, not understanding, or thinking that you're incorrect, and intentionally misunderstanding you.
Right, exactly.
Some of those things are okay and understandable, even if they should be fixed. The other one of those things is, no, that's just being a dick. So if someone after you've explained what you mean, why you mean it, and recognize why they would not immediately, come to the same meaning in their mind that you're trying to convey, if they just decide to then be a dick, well, okay, then you probably shouldn't keep talking to that person. That's probably not someone who's worth your time. So, we're going to go through the same set of dictionaries. Let's see. We have sex, distinction between male and female, but we actually don't see this as being used to talk about the act or specifically about bits of anatomy. So then in 1913, we have the distinguishing peculiarity of male or female animals and plants, one of two divisions of organic beings, and then in botany. And then, I forget I might have forgotten the use thing. But by 2020, we have the state of being male or female, but we also have sexually motivated phenomena or behavior, see sexual intercourse. So between 1913 and 2022, that becomes one of the normal uses of it, which is why, again, gender got taken from grammar, shoved into this role, and then only more recently did it get used to distinguish between gender roles and biological sex. And of course, also, distinguishing between biological sex is not always actually easy. So the problem with biological sex is that, like most things in the real world, it actually exists on a spectrum, and so falls prey to the spectrum or the gradient problem. This is a well-known thing where it's sort of like, how many grains of sand does it take to make a pile of sand? And the thing is, there's no actual answer to that question. And however, you can usually be pretty certain at the extremes whether or not you have a pile of sand. So for instance, if you have 5 grains of sand, do you have a pile? Well, no. But let's say you have 3 million grains of sand all in one place. Do you have a pile? Yeah, probably. Probably a pile of sand. So the problem there, and we're not going to get into all of the deep biology stuff, but if you're just looking at very extremes, like, okay, this person has managed to father a child on one end, versus this other person on the other end has managed to become pregnant. Well, those are usually good ways to know for certain. biological sex someone's in, but what about someone who is sterile or has a chromosomal abnormality or has androgen sensitivity or things like this? Then it starts to get more complicated and it becomes difficult to actually define these things. I don't know if you want to give a little bit about that, David, while I get ready for the talk about pronouns.
Yeah, sure. So biological sex is a lot more complicated than it first appears. I'm sure that when you were in high school biology, you learned that a woman has an XX chromosome and a man has an XY chromosome, and that's pretty much it. But just looking at the chromosomes themselves, this is a lot more complicated than it meets the eye, because you're going to have various arrangements of those chromosomes, and such as you can have XXY, you can have had just an X, you can have a man can have an XX chromosome and a woman can have an XY chromosome. And one of the key mechanisms, this isn't the only mechanism, but one of the mechanisms that causes this is what's called sex reversal, which is basically during embryonic development, for some reason, the after the chromosomes form, there was it kind of reverses. So you start out as a female, but then it reverses to a male, and so the result is having a male phenotype but a female genotype. I'm gonna try and see if I can get a little bit into that. Sex reversal.
One thing I want to read a quick question, or not question, but a comment from Mads, who says, "Hi, Dapper Dinosaur. Happy Pride Day, Day 4. Yes, it is Day 4. At least it is here in the United States. If you're in like New Zealand or something, it might be Day 6, or maybe Day 5 because I can math. Yeah, I know math. I'm a pansexual trans girl, and what you're doing is great, educating folks on. Well, thank you, Mads. I really appreciate the support. So Snaptrap has an interesting point while Dave was looking some stuff up. A deviation of sex, which you might not want to start with a word that has such a negative connotation. Your goal is to be understood and not make people upset. Does not equal a new category of sex. So in some ways, you say that that's true to some extent. And one of the reasons that, generally speaking, humans are seen as having two biological sexes, and then people who fall into them more or less is because, at a broad sense, there are two biological roles in reproduction in humans. There are those who produce large gametes and can become pregnant, and those who produce small gametes and can cause other people to become pregnant. But a lot of the people who we think of as belonging to one sex or the other don't actually fall into one of those categories. And then there are people whose both anatomy and gamete production is somewhat intermediate. And while they tend to not be able to reproduce, or at least not without great difficulty, that doesn't make them not people, and it doesn't make them invalid as humans, and it also doesn't make them either men or women, or either male or female, because those aren't all the same thing. And the thing is, you have to recognize that even though people who, like, say, have chromosomal abnormalities, or who are intersex in terms of their primary sex characteristics, or who are sterile for various reasons, whether by choice or through happenstance, while it might be hard to put those people into the easy categories of male and female that people like to pretend are just obvious in all cases, those people exist. You don't get to just pretend they don't, right? And so while it is true to some extent to still say that humans are a sexually reproducing species with two sexes in terms of reproduction, you have to realize that it's like saying humans are a bipedal species. It's basically true that humans are bipeds, but when you come across someone with one leg or no legs, or whose legs don't work, you don't get to dismiss them and pretend that they don't count, because in your mind, humans are a bipedal species. It doesn't work that way. Those are real people who matter. And so the fact that they're not representing the majority of how, in this case, sexuality, or not sexuality, but like physical sex works, Still have to take them into account. So in some cases, is it easy? Yeah. Most humans you would call male have obviously male organs and are fertile with people who you would probably designate as female. But when you come to people who you can't easily do that with, that's a thing. You can't just pretend they aren't there. And so, David, did you look up what you were looking for?
Yeah, I'm still trying to find it. But anyway, while I'm trying to find that, there's another really interesting thing in genetics that I find really interesting, and that is what's called genetic mosaicism, where you have some cells that have one set of genotypes, and then the other set of cells might have a different phenotype. So you can have a condition in which some cells in your body have an XX karyotype, and then you have another cell that has the other. So you can have both XX and XY in the same person through genetic mosaicism. So that obviously begs the question: if you're defining biological sex, if your determination of what is sex is based purely on the chromosomes, then what gender is someone who has both sets of chromosomes?
Yeah, it's not as easy as simply say, oh, everyone either has XX or XY. It doesn't work that way. Now, Silver Holler for $5 says, when people learn a foreign, he says Proto-Indo-European, but I think it just means Indo-European language, they get to start memorizing genders for nouns. Fun, and not all languages have the same number of genders. Actually, that is something I want to touch on real quick before we go on to pronouns. Is that many languages have gender systems in which masculine and feminine are not the basis on which gender distinctions are drawn. So, for instance, Swahili has about 16 genders, none of which are masculine or feminine. They have like genders for things like inanimate objects, dangerous things. I think there's one specifically for snakes or something like that. Like, it gets very specific. And you might say, well, why do you need so many noun genders? And here's why. Since different nouns in different genders are referred to using different pronouns and different inflectional types in the verb, as well as adjectives inflect for gender, it allows Swahili to not have to super explicitly mark grammatical uses of nouns like subject versus object, either by word order or by use of a case system, while still leaving it usually unambiguous in most sentences what position in the in the meaning of the sentence, whether subject, object, indirect object, whatever various nouns are. So Swahili actually uses an extensive gender marking system that also affects the verb to free up word order without having to use a case system. So there's a whole lot of different ways that the word gender or the noun genders are used. Technically speaking, Navajo doesn't have a noun gender system, but it has a noun hierarchy, which is similar, but it's not very inflectional. But the order of nouns in a sentence has to follow a certain hierarchy, which is usually an animacy distinction. But there are other languages that actually do have an animacy-based noun system where they'll have inanimate versus animate nouns, different genders, two different genders there, where things like animals and people end up in the animate, and then things like rocks end up in inanimate. But then there's a group of things that switch back and forth or aren't always obvious, like some languages have rivers as animate nouns because they move. Some have plants as animate nouns because they're alive. Some as inanimate because they don't actively move, to at least on a human time scale most of the time. So yeah, gender from a grammatical standpoint has a lot of interesting functions, and a lot of languages use it in different ways that you're not used to. There are some Germanic languages where masculine and feminine have merged into a common gender, and then there's also a neuter gender. So yeah, it's a very interesting topic in linguistics, and it's also a very pervasive feature in many languages. So it's doing something.
Yep. Also, I have a very important announcement to make. We have 43 people watching the stream, but there are only 29 likes.
For
so
shame.
Please, what a shame. What are you waiting for? Smash that like button.
So guys, we're actually going through this a little bit faster than I thought we would, so we probably won't be on for a very long stream. This probably won't end up being a 2-hour stream, but that's okay. The next thing we're going to talk about is we're actually going to talk about pronouns. But before that, I want to preface it with the idea of a closed class of words, which we did mention earlier. So,
Yeah.
in your everyday life, you frequently come across new verbs and new nouns, and new verbs and new nouns are added to the language all the time, right? Um, Basically, anytime someone shows up in an English-speaking country with a new food, usually a new noun gets added, right, for the name of that dish. Um, or we add new nouns like app, which is short for application, but now it's basically just its own noun. So that's what's called an open class of words. In English, adjectives, adverbs, nouns, verbs, these are all open classes. Words come into this class of words all the time, and that's just fine. But there are also closed classes of words. One big one is preposition. When was the last time you heard a new preposition in English? I never have. Have you, David?
I have not. Honestly, it's been so long since I took an actual grammar class that I almost forgot what a preposition actually is.
Oh, those are words like in, at, on, with,
Okay.
around.
Okay.
Now, actually, prepositions in English have actually added a few over the last century or so. A few words have come in from being adjectives, starting to being used like prepositions. So it's not. One of the things I want to say is that closed classes are not closed in the sense that they will never be added to or subtracted from. Closed classes are simply classes which resist additional members and who generally only take in new members or lose members over the course of centuries rather than a single lifetime.
Yeah.
So, other examples are demonstratives. So, things like those, these, that, this. Some people have yonder as another demonstrative, but that's a word that was actually lost from that class in most varieties of English, not one that was added to it. Another one is articles or determiners, as they're sometimes called. So, an, the, so like a student, an orange, things like that. You're very unlikely to get a new article in English like that.
Yeah.
But another big one is personal pronouns. The last time English added a personal pronoun, and personal pronouns words like I, me, you, they, them, he, her, it.
Yeah.
Those are all personal pronouns. The last time English added a personal pronoun was like the 1200s, and it was in fact they.
Yeah, it's interesting because the word they has been used in the singular since the time, at least since the time of Shakespeare. I know Shakespeare has used they in a
He did. And
sense.
we're going to get.
And by the way,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I do want to share. This is, I think, the perfect time to share this embarrassing tweet.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, this is from an account that ended up getting so embarrassed that they deleted their entire Twitter account. So feel free to share this. Yep. So any teacher who uses they, them as a singular pronoun should lose their teaching license. Yeah. Yep. 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 Right. Right.
Apparently, I've been silent. Gosh darn it. guys, I'm super professional at this. Tell you what, guys. Here's the commercial part. Go sign up to the Patreon, and eventually, if enough people do that, I'll be able to hire a producer who will stop those kinds of things from happening.
Yeah. Is anyone able to hear me?
Yeah, they were able to hear you the whole time.
Yeah, so you can hear me, but they can't hear.
Okay, well, so what I was saying there was, we're going to talk about why it is that we have someone here who is misunderstanding the reason for why they find this use unnatural. Because this person is actually right. This is not a typical use of a pronoun that she's responding to. But she's wrong about why. I'm also going to talk about why it might not matter that it's an atypical use of the pronoun. So first, they as a pronoun is new to English as of the 1200s, 13th century. So it actually comes from Old Norse, where it was a demonstrative. In fact, is related etymologically to the English word that, which was originally an article, was a word for the. And so the reason this ends up coming into English is because in Old English, the word for they was sie, but that was also the word for she, which got confusing. You never knew whether or not someone meant she or they. Now, verb forms could help with that, but still, it becomes confusing. So, what I want to look at next is this discussion about how they, their, and them is used, focusing on, and this is the 1889, so this is before the use of they as a personal pronoun that you would actually use for a particular person has come about as a common thing, or I think even before it might have been proposed. So, the question of the priority of using they, their, them to refer to indefinite pronouns and singular nouns has two aspects that are distinct but often overlap. Both relate to perceived gaps in language. First and most often discussed is this. One most annoying gap in English is that created by the lack of third-person singular pronouns that does not state explicitly the sex of the person or persons referred to. This missing pronoun, in other words, would be a common gender or common sex third-person singular pronoun. The second aspect of the question is refers to the lack of common number or neutral number. So one of the things we're saying is there is no obvious way without using from just the sort of first blush look at English pronouns to refer to a third-person referent without reference to number or gender in the grammatical sense, right?
Right.
So let's take a look at common gender use, because this is really what we're talking about. And so we have from 1395, so this is, like 200 years since the word they has come into the language. And whoso findeth him out of switch blame, they will come up. This is from Chaucer. So this is Middle English. This isn't even modern English. Which probably means I probably should have pronounced it like it was Middle English, but whatever, we'll get over that.
Yeah, and Senator, I do find it interesting, the evolution of the English language, that if you go back to even 500 years ago, well, even that, if you actually open up an original 1611 KJV, it's almost unreadable, just because of how much English has changed over the past 400 years.
Yeah, most people are using a much more recent edition that made a whole lot of spelling changes and even a few changes to some.
Yeah, but don't tell that to the KJV only crowd. But I digress, off topic.
Yeah. So use of plural pronouns to refer to indefinite pronouns. Anyone, each, everyone, nobody, somebody, etc. results from the occurrence of two forces. So one of the things I want to point out is that this is actually in common with this tweet. So the teacher here is someone of unknown and unspecified gender. And since the 1300s at least, it has been common, if not necessarily always standard, to use there as a pronoun to refer to indefinite persons. Now, you're going to see there was a suggestion where, let's see, where would so one of the things that was suggested later on by actually prescriptivists is that the use of the third-person masculine singular, he, his, him. This tradition goes back to 18th century grammarians. So this is actually not a very old idea. who boxed themselves into the position by first deciding that the indefinite pronouns must always be singular. They then had to decide between the masculine and feminine singular pronouns for use referring to indefinites, and they chose the masculine. They were, of course, all men. Actually, there is plenty of evidence of the masculine pronoun used this way. So here we have 1943. A person can thus learn to swim up to the limits imposed by his physique. Eric Hamian for $20 says, I spent years consciously training myself to use singular they. The effort has to be conscious because grammar rules taught in school didn't align with casual use. Now in recent years, I've had to fight that training. Not to use singular. Yeah, so one of the things is that what we're talking about here is a lot of the rules that you learn in school actually do in fact come from 1700s grammarians who were not linguists. The difference here between these 1700s grammarians and modern linguists is that they were prescriptivists. They said this is how English ought to be used, not because that's how it's used, not because it's how people will best understand each other, but because we think it is proper to use it in this way, which we deem to be logical and fitting. That's how you get rules like don't split infinitives. Why aren't you supposed to split infinitive, David? Do you know the reason?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
So there's a rule that's often taught in grammar classes, although less so now, I'm happy to say, about not splitting infinitives. So that's things like when in Star Trek they say, to boldly go. That's considered a split infinitive. It should say, to go boldly, according to these grammarians from the 1700s. Do you know why they say that?
That I do not know.
It's because you couldn't do it in Latin, but not because there was some rule about it in Latin, but because in Latin, infinitives are a single word. It's not to something, it's just a form of the verb. So they were just like, well, Latin doesn't do it. Well, yeah, it can't. It physically can't. What are you going to do? Like take off one of the, separate out syllables of the verb and stick an adverb in there? It's a silly rule. So the same thing with the use of the third person masculine singular as the just stand-in indefinite pronoun. It was just something made up by the 17th century grammarians. The use of they in these cases is actually the older and more common use throughout history in English from the time, at least, of the late 1300s. So one of the things you'll notice is that all of these uses of him or he as indefinite pronouns are fairly late. Actually, we get 1956, 1985, 1980, 1982, 1984, whereas our first uses of they as the indefinite pronouns are coming 1576. So the use of they as just singular is actually very old. But here's the important distinction. Another thing about these, I'm going to go through all of the they as singular things, or at least a few that we didn't go over before. It is too hideous for anyone in their senses to buy. Anyone in their senses. The detachment and sympathy of someone approaching their own death, their own, 1962. What makes you their confidant, Jane Austen, 1815. But one of the things I want to point out is in these cases, you're not referring to a particular known individual. And that is what this person from this tweet is mixing up. Oh, David, you got rid of it right as I was going to it. So anyway, if you
I'm sorry, I thought we were done with it.
That's all right, I didn't tell you either way.
Yep, I'm sorry.
So
you
that
want me to bring it back up?
Yeah, it's not a big deal. But that person wasn't actually objecting to using they as a singular pronoun because she was already doing it. The thing that has only very recently been a thing at all is using they to refer to known individuals. Carrie Bronson for $5 says, I feel as though you're missing an important point. TERFs and the like can't count as three. Well, that's a separate problem about mathematical that we'll have to use. We'll have to talk about that some other time. But yes, that may also be a problem. So, and the thing is, interestingly, this 1989 dictionary does not actually get into the use of they as referring to a particular person. So it ends with they, their, them is used in both literature and general writing to refer to singular nouns when those nouns have some notion of plurality about them, which is, we're talking about indefinite number. All of the cases in this section and a good many of those in the first section illustrate this operation of notional agreement. And so at no point do we actually get into they as a pronoun for particular people. So one of the things you have to remember is that, one, this idea between sort of non-specific gender in the grammatical sense and non-specific number, again, in the grammatical sense, and the use of they is not the same use as when you tell someone that that your pronoun, say, is they, and that you would prefer to be referred to as they in the third person. That is, in fact, a new use. And one of the things about grammatical rules from your first language is that they are hard to change. So Erchamian said in his $20 super chat, which I'll just bring back up for myself so I can read it. Erchamian said, I spent years consciously training myself not to use singular they. Why? Well, because as this 1989 usage dictionary from Webster is talking about, that's been a normal common use. But it wasn't the normal common use to refer to individual people who are known to you with that pronoun. Instead, it was indefinite people who are hypothetical or unknown. An effort had to be conscious because the grammar rules taught in school didn't align with casual use. Exactly. Anytime you change the grammar that you learned basically as a baby, it's going to take time. Now, in recent years, I've had to fight that training. And so here's the thing. Me too. I know people who prefer to be referred to with they, but it feels really weird every time I do it. Not because it's wrong, not because they're wrong, but because the use of they to refer to particular individuals is so new that it's hard to do it naturally. It requires me to think about it. And here's another thing. This is also connected to why those new pronouns like Z and Zer never caught on. Like, when was the last time you actually heard someone trying to use one of those?
I never heard anyone trying to use them, but I kind of find that to be a really good point, because anytime something new comes up, invariably uh, there's going to be some resistance. It doesn't matter if it's technology, it doesn't matter if it's a language, it could be anything. Anything that comes up new is automatically going to have some pushback. Just like the example I was talking about earlier, when literally was literally defined as figuratively in the dictionary, and language purists didn't like it.
And so one of the things I want to point out is that this is also the reason why we talked about a closed class of words. That's to do with the new pronouns that we're trying to make them a thing. It's been a while, I think, since that's really been very popular to try to add new pronouns to refer to what people are now using they for. And the reason is because it's already very hard to get people to change the way that they think about this grammatically, even though they can't usually articulate why they think it's ungrammatical. But it's even harder to get them to add an entire new pronoun to the language that they already speak. It's almost impossible. English has added one pronoun in the past 800 years, in terms of personal pronouns. One. And it was only because it was all the one that pronoun replaced was the exact same sound as another pronoun that had another important use. So they got rid of it. They got rid of that use, and they adopted this one. English does not like to add pronouns. Now, some languages do, right? So in Japanese, personal pronouns are actually not really much of a closed class. In fact, over the decades, which words are used as first and second person pronouns change fairly frequently in Japanese. And in fact, at any given time, if you look at Japanese sort of synchronically, which is a linguistic term for looking at language at a particular point in time as opposed to looking at it through time to see how it changes, synchronically, Japanese often has more than one pronoun with the exact same meaning, because use of pronouns in Japanese is considered to be kind of rude, and so you use a noun as a stand-in for a pronoun, but then eventually it just comes to be seen as a pronoun, and then you have to pick a new word.
Right.
So Japanese actually has what's called a euphemism treadmill for pronouns. Euphemism treadmill is where a word refers to something, then that thing is seen as negative, so the word becomes a bit of a slur. So then you have to come up with a new word to refer to the thing. But since the thing is still seen negatively by many people, the new word just becomes the new slur. So that has happened with, very obviously in English, with words to do with intellectual impairment or low intelligence. So at one point, the word moron was a medical term. You could actually diagnose someone as being a moron. A doctor would let you know. And they meant something by it. It was a technical term. Well, now it's just an insult. Same thing happened with various slurs that are sort of ableist. Now people don't associate the word lame with not being able to walk, but that's what it meant originally.
Right, and just like the word dumb, if you read the King James Bible, you would see the word dumb as being someone who is unable to speak. But we really don't use that in modern day English.
And Van Dali 1998 has a good point here for $5. He says, of course, there's a difference between trying and forgetting to use the right pronouns and those who purposefully choose not to because they are dicks. And so, yeah, that's one of the things that I'm pointing out here is there are reasons why people make mistakes and get it wrong, and those are not easy things to fix, right? Because your first language grammar is very ingrained. It's just a natural way that you think and that words come out. But there is a big difference between trying and getting it wrong because it's not the way your brain is working, and purposefully choosing to ignore how people want to be.
Exactly. And I think this goes really along with the platinum rule. Treat others the way that they want to be treated. If someone asks you to use they and them to refer to them and not she or he, then I think that is what we should do.
I I did the wrong thing and added the then we don't need that anymore. So we're actually going to wrapping up soon. Oh, Hive Science. Okay, so Hive Science is here. That she used to be known as Brainbug, but that is a new channel name. I like the channel name.
Yeah, I like it too.
So,
Brainbug, how you doing?
so that is one question: is Hive Science how you want to be referred to as a name, or is it the name of the channel and you want to be referred to as something apart from that? So do let me know about that because I usually assume channel name is the name of the person, but then some people have channel names that like aren't what they themselves call themselves on their own channel. So like, I do want to know about that.
Yeah, I don't know if I understand this comment. Formation 13, like fascist and concentration camp, they don't mean to most people what they literally do.
Well, so that there is something there, right? Like, so originally the idea behind fascism was simply that a group of people group together for their common good and are stronger together. I'll call you Bree. Okay. You don't mind being called Hive Science. I will be honest, you may have to remind me a few times because it is very easy for me to just use the screen name that I see. So if I screw that up, please let me know. Because, yeah, there's a fair chance. So here's the thing: I'm not great with names generally.
Yeah,
So-
I'm horrible with names. I am horrible with names. I don't mind being called Hive Science, so
Okay.
that's fine.
So
But
I will
but
try
am
to go with
loving-
Bree.
yeah, but I love the new channel name.
Oh yeah, it's a cool name.
Yeah.
So let's see. I just lost my train of thought. You know what? It's not terribly important. I think we're basically ready to wrap it up. We did a relatively short stream, but I think that the big takeaways that I want to go for here are one, most people I've talked to are wrong about the etymologies of the words sex and gender, specifically about the etymology of the word gender, and especially its history of use. Gender did not start out as a synonym for sex. It started out primarily as a grammatical term, or as a word that just basically means the same thing as like sort, kind, or type. It was then taken as a euphemism to mean sex, and for most of the time, it was seen as a euphemism and not just a normal word for that. Then eventually, in the 20th century, it became a standard term as a synonym for sex. And that's basically what it was when, say, I was growing up. And then very recently, in the 60s, was it ever first used as differentiation with a differentiation from sex. And then only in the last decade or two has it become at all common for most people to use it with that distinction. So one of the things is don't get that mixed up. And also understand why it is that some people have trouble understanding that there's a difference because for their entire lives, for the most part, there wasn't a difference with anyone they were ever talking to. And Also, that's not an excuse for ignoring the difference if you're someone who has trouble remembering that there is a difference or realizing that there is one. Once it's explained to you, you understand it, it now behooves you to at least acknowledge that that's how people are using it, even if it feels unnatural to you. The same thing is going to be true for pronouns. One, trying to add a pronoun to the English language, I can't say that you're never going to do it. However, it's sort of like winning the lottery, right? Not a safe bet. Probably best spending your time on something else other than adding a new pronoun to the English language. Hawkskulls for £2 says, so AIG are a bag of AMAB reproductive. Yes, AMAB reproductive organs. By the way, guys, this is not a drinking stream. My beverage today has no alcohol, and I am not drinking for triggers. So I do appreciate the AIG or a bag of dicks comments because they are. But if you're hoping,
speaking of AIG, sorry to interrupt, but on Thursday, Dr. Dan and myself had the immense pleasure of talking to Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson over on
Yes.
Striving for Eternity's channel, and we're going to be hopefully doing a stream reviewing that. Pepper, have you seen that stream yet?
So I watched some of it. It was honestly kind of hard to watch because Jeanson is a smug little prick.
Yeah, I kind of love. By the way, just as spoiler alert, I discussed the email in here, and when we believe that this is a combination of both Semitic and germline. He's like, oh well, we believe that's just faith. And just hand waves the reason why they believe that. Just quote mine saying, we believe, therefore they're wrong. No, that's not how it works. Like, I was very disappointed with his answer to my objection. And I kind of love how he admitted that he's using the mutation rate as the substitution rate, which you can't do. But I digress. That's just go watch that stream and go watch the discussion between Dr. Dan, myself, and Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson.
Here's the fun thing with that stream, though. It started with Jeanson basically saying, "Oh yeah, I'm a sexist." I don't know if you caught that.
Yeah, no, I did not.
He basically started out with a story about how he's a complementarian. That's just fundamentalist Christian for sexist.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with complementarian. What
basically, it's an ideological reason why you should have sexist stereotypes and you should maintain like 1950s gender roles.
Okay, so basically, I'm just looking it up now. The belief that the husband should be the spiritual head of the family, and that basically the wife is just a submissive person to the husband.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, complementarianism is basically I rule the house.
It's just a polite way to say sexist, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do want to address one quick thing because we do have to start wrapping up, I think.
Yeah.
Federal Bead, apparently Bree asked if I had addressed cis versus trans. I didn't. I also missed that. So guys, if you really definitely want to see something, do tag me, because otherwise there's like a 60-70% chance it's going to scroll past and I'm not going to know. So I'm just going to go for a little bit of etymology with cis and trans. So we have cis and transgender coming out of the sort of feminist use of the word gender that starts in the 60s and really starts to take off in feminist literature in the decades following, and then starts to penetrate into sort of general public awareness significantly later on than that. You really probably starting sometime in the 2000s is when it really started getting into like common awareness outside of feminist literature. And so cis and trans actually starts being applied to the word gender shortly after that, and they both come from Latin. Cis basically means on the same side of, and it is used as an opposite to trans, which means across or cross. So that's why you get things like transistors. They're things that resist across certain paths but not others. Transformers, you're changing the form of, say, the electricity from one form to another. So you're going to cross different forms. So I get a transformer. And so while cis doesn't really mean that the way it's used in Latin, because it's become a common thing to use it as a opposite for trans, then the word transgender was used based on the feminist use of the word gender to refer to people who are basically going from the gender commonly associated with the sex noted on their birth certificate to the gender typically associated with the sex that was not noted on the birth certificate, because generally birth certificates only male or female. In fact, that's a problem that I think should be addressed because while I disagree with the terminology that you are assigned a sex at birth, usually what happens is your sex is observed from primary sexual characteristics to which you generally fall very neatly into as a baby. Um, there are people who are born with intersex conditions, and I think that should be something that can be noted on a birth certificate. And but yeah, so that is how we get those words. I think at this point they're reasonably well accepted, although you still do get pushback from people who don't like being labeled cisgender or a cis woman or a cis man or something like that. And I don't really have a great handle on all of their arguments why or why not, or what kinds of etymological misunderstandings or facts or things like that might be involved with people who are objecting in that area. So I don't want to talk about too much why that might be object to, because honestly, I haven't looked into it as much as perhaps I should. But then again, I can't be on top of why every cisgendered person is angry about everything.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that's a pretty good way to wrap up the discussion. So thank you, Dapper Dino, for having me on. I really appreciate you giving me the invite, and I had a good time, and I hope you did too.
I did. Is there anything coming up on your channel that you want to tell people about? Because your channel is linked in the description, guys. Go check out David P. Neff's channel.
Yeah, so for those of you who do not know, there is a brand new debate channel called Debate Cafe, and I think it's ran by Snake is Right, and I think maybe one other person. But it's nice to finally have a debate platform that's not modern day debate or standing for fraud. We're standing for wife beating, whatever you prefer. But anyway, I'm going to be on Debate Cafe Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. And I'm going to be debating on Tangelo on the Shroud of Turin. So that should be
goodness.
So that's going to be a lot of fun.
My favorite thing for Otangelo in the Shroud Turn, because for some reason he's decided that's his reason for being a Christian, which, like, okay, sure. My favorite thing with him is, like, do you know how the image got there? Which I'm just like, no, but it got there. It got there in the medieval period. So no matter how it got there, it wasn't by being Jesus' burial cloth. So I don't care.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the carbon dating completely annihilates it, but the anatomy is so wrong.
Even if it were a miraculous image, it's still not an image of Jesus's body from his burial.
Yeah, and I find it interesting because we have the front of Jesus and we got the back of Jesus, but we don't have the sides.
Those didn't exist.
Yeah,
because Jesus didn't have sides. He was two-dimensional.
Yeah, which I think that those three facts alone are enough to show that the Shroud is a fraud.
Oh, Karen says that I'm in Paris and can't super chat. Thank you. Hey, you know what? Look, you don't have to super chat. I appreciate everyone who does, but look, as you guys know, I don't require you to super chat for me to interact with you. It's just that if you don't at least tag me, I probably won't notice. But real quick, so on this channel, the next thing that's happening is we have Kent with Bent on the 7th. Then on Thursday the 9th, have the Gentile Matt Powell. If you've seen the thumbnail, you know it's just Matt Powell. And that's because I did a 3-part series on a guy who I call the Jewish Matt Powell because he's at least as dumb, but he's Jewish, so he's the Powell. This one is just a quick one about Matt Powell. It's a single video. It's not going to be multi-part. I don't know what's happening on the 11th, but the 14th is going to be another Kent with Bent because Erica has some stuff in her personal life that I'm not even going to bother checking to see if she's available. It won't be. So it would normally have been an Eric with Eric, but instead it's going to be a supernumerary Kent with Bent, but Maddie from Science Side Up is going to be there, and it's also going to be my birthday stream. My birthday. We're going to be doing a combination Maddie, Bent, birthday, while we drink and laugh at Kent Hovind, or at least I drink, because in case you guys didn't know, it's public now. Maddie's pregnant. So congratulations to Science Side Up over there.
Hey, congratulations, Science Side Up.
Yep, she announced that on her channel, and I was finally like, oh, finally, I don't have to pretend that I don't know about this anymore. Because she told some of the people she normally streams with like months in advance to say, hey, this is why, sometimes I'm sick or I have to eat for, pee breaks early or I'm not drinking beer. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, fine. But yeah, good reason she wanted to keep that on the DL for a while. So now finally, I don't have to pretend that I don't know that. Let's see. The 16th, we're going to be talking about a guy who does conspiracy videos who says that dragons are real. That's going to be a thing that we talk about. The 18th, it looks like it's going to be a leaving young Earth creationism. I need to schedule that in next week or so. But other than that, thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate all of you showing up. A lot of you hit like, which I really appreciate. I appreciate all the super chats. And we're going to say goodbye and special thank you to all of my channel members and patrons. Before we do, if you want to join the Patreon, link in the description. If you want to join the channel, there is a button below there. And if you join the channel, link your Discord to YouTube, and it will automatically add you to my channel members and patrons Discord server. So I now have automatic integration between YouTube and Discord. So please, if you want into that Discord, which is a lot of fun, I have a lot of fun in there. Yeah, link your Discord to YouTube.
Yeah.
Anyway, here we go. Thanks for watching, but before you go, I just want to say a special thank you to my channel members and my patrons, especially those pledging $20 or above. Work in Progress, Benthoven, Cynically Skeptic, Denny5252, Ian Chen, John Ackerman, Chris Love, Landon Noel, Yapetus, Mabbity Babbity, Sphincter of Doom, The Venerable Bede, and Patrick Dennis. As you probably know, YouTube is a very volatile platform, and from month to month my income on the channel can swing wildly. But the people you see on screen are directly supporting so that I don't have to worry too much about that, and the channel can keep going as it is, and perhaps even improving. If you'd like to join this team, there are links below to join the channel or in the description to join the Patreon. The Patreon starts as low as $1 a month, and the channel memberships start as low as $1.99 a month. On Patreon, you can even get a discount for pledging annually. If you do decide to pledge, you'll get access to an exclusive Discord server just for channel supporters, as well as early access to all of my pre-recorded videos, often up to 2 months in advance. Higher tiers will unlock even better perks. Now, if an annual or monthly pledge isn't right for you, but you still want to support the channel, there is a merch store down in the description, as well as an Amazon wishlist, just for me. And if financial support isn't something you can or want to do, then if you still want to help out the channel, please just like and share these videos and make sure you comment on them. It really helps the channel out. Thanks again for watching.